very pleased to welcome you for this talk tonight. And let me first start by introducing Michelle Brito, who is our curator here in Agora. Michelle is a London-based freelance curator working to create dialogues relating to societal concerns in the Middle East through art, culture, and creative-based methods. Michelle's efforts are focused on program design, coordination, communication, and promotion of organizational initiatives to local communities. Michelle has a Master of Art in Culture, Policy, and Management. Michelle is currently working as a program manager and curator for the React program at P21 Gallery here in London. And now, after this wonderful introduction, I'm pleased to hand over to Michelle.
Thank you, Mini. That was a nice introduction. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for retelling our histories via 3D digital art. My name is Michelle Brito. As Mimi mentioned, a volunteer curator here at Agora Digital Arts, and also a freelance curator. I curated Rayan's first solo exhibition of a Magic Realist Afrabia last year in 2019 at the P21 Gallery here in London as part of the React program. And so I'm excited to catch up with her and also introduce you to her amazing work. So tonight I'll be speaking in conversation with digital artist and architectural designer Rayan Elnayal, who many of you know, maybe some of you don't, but you will soon. And we'll be exploring her artistic journey and conceptualization of her latest project, a Magic Realist Afrabia, which is a series of digital prints inspired by Sudanese author Tayeb Salih's novel, Seasons of Migration to the North. And we'll be exploring ideas on multicultural identities, hybridity, and the third space. We'll also discuss relevant themes in the work, including magic realism, Afrofuturism, the portrayal of Western media narratives, identity, and ethnic hybridism. And with that, I'm excited and delighted and honored to present not just an amazing woman and artist, but a good friend, Rayan Elnayal.
So welcome, everyone. My name is Rayan Elnayal, and I am an artist and architectural designer. I work as an architectural assistant full-time, and I graduate from the University of Greenwich last year from my Master's in Architecture. And Afrabia was part of my final year architectural thesis project, and then since then I've just kind of, you know, when I've had time, continued to develop and to draw for it. I'm going to start presenting now, if that's okay.
That's been an interesting year, to say the least. I think it's been a while since I've last even seen you, which I think was at the opening of the Imagining Afrabia at Rich Mix. That was the second showing of a Magic Realist, right before the lockdown, actually. And so I'm glad we finally have this time an opportunity to catch up and see what you've been up to since the world has turned upside down. If you can let us know what you've been up to since graduation, other than, you know, being isolated like the rest of us. And I know, like you mentioned, your work was your graduate thesis project. And if you can just walk us through like when and how, you know, you began to explore that intersection of art and architecture, that would be great.
So for me, Afrabia was actually a kind of a project that I've been wanting to do for a long time. But in all honesty, I kind of really struggled to talk about a place like Sudan, sometimes to a panel that may have never been there or don't know much about even the culture or the language we speak and the aesthetics that I wanted to draw from. But in my final year, if you've studied architecture in the UK or in London especially, you'll know that sometimes universities have within their fifth year kind of a more experimental or abstract approach to the architectural thesis. And so for me, my final year was the perfect time to explore this project that I've always wanted to explore, which is it draws a lot from being a third culture kid. So not just, you know, Sudan, but being a British Sudanese and being Sudanese within diaspora, and exploring that third space architecturally. For me, there wasn't a struggle to find a language that had kind of many precedents that I could draw from. And that's when I started to look into Tayeb Salih's novel, which is Season of Migration to the North, which is all about a man, Sudanese, who kind of is told that he's very intelligent and needs to pursue a particular career or pursue education in the West. And he goes to London. And the novel is kind of all about him being within the diaspora, and actually a lot about Orientalism and being seen as sometimes exotic as the West. And for me, that kind of all played into the aesthetics that you might find in ethnic enclaves in London. And so this project was actually based in Church Street, Paddington. And if you know, that's just like off of Edgware Road, which is like the Little Arabia. And so Afrabia is not exclusive to Sudan, but it includes Sudan. And because I'm Sudanese, inevitably it's going to be heavily based on Sudanese culture. So yeah, so it's a personal project. And that's, I think that's how it came about. And it was something like I was itching to do. And I'm glad I did it. And since then, since graduating, I kind of went into work to train as an architectural designer. So I went to become an architect here in the UK. And since then, I've been working full time, but I've still tried to draw and develop this idea because I felt like a year wasn't enough for me personally.
Cool. So yeah, if you, I guess, we want to kind of know what that are, now that we know kind of the history and the background of how it started, if you can walk us through that artistic process of creating Afrabia, from like visualization to that conceptualization and all that. Like you talked a little bit about obviously the book and inspiration and stuff. So if you want to just let us, more into that, that would be great.
So I'm Sudanese from Sudan, and though I was born in London, I visited Sudan almost every year. I've always felt like all that theory, all that writing on the third space, referring to writers such as Edward Said, who wrote Orientalism, Homi K. Baba, who wrote Location of Culture. They speak of being from two places at once, belonging to neither at the same time. I really resonate with that. So for me, hybridity was a key, and it's kind of where I started looking at the Afro and the Arab, the Western and the Afro-Arab, the real and the magical, the first and second place and the third place, England, Sudan, Orientalism and authenticity. And so Orientalism again is referring to that kind of exotic aesthetic, which in the novel Season of Migration to the North, there's a space that Mustafa, the main character, exoticizes, and he calls it the den of lethal lies, which is why I use the word authenticity here. So it's kind of playing with what's real and what's culturally authentic and what is lies. And again, that kind of, I think you can see that in places like Chinatowns that are a lot of the times kind of very exotic and westernized views of what that place looks like. And so it's kind of never a really actually modern or good representation of China. It's kind of, when you go to Chinatowns, you see a very exaggerated and Western view. You have like kind of a little bit of a cycle. So hybridity then led me to magic realism. I looked at how post-colonial novelists use magic realism to express feelings and situations that could not be expressed in literal terms. Magic realism, unlike surrealism, is actually very concerned with the real, and it's all about using magic purely just to tell a better version of the truth. And so this is when I started looking into Sudanese magic realism and hybrid identities. And like I said, this novel is kind of what kickstarted the ideas on that project. Like I said here, the project is based on Church Street, Paddington. And in particular, there's an antique store in Paddington. I'm not sure if anyone's visited it here, but it's a wonderful, like amazing, crazy place because it has two names. So Alfayez, is its English name, and then Alfayez is its Arab name. And what it is it's actually kind of like an indoor market where there's just loads of tiny little glass stalls where sellers from many different countries, and there's actually a map inside that tells you, here's the Oriental and here's the African sellers who trade antiques and trade things from their countries. And so for me, Afrabia is kind of like an explosion of that kind of space. And so the Alfayez Antique Store is kind of almost it's fed into the reimagination of that whole street.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so that's kind of like Afrabia in a diagram.
I remember when we were doing research for your project, and that was the first time I had been actually to Church Street, and
Yeah.
we were going to Alfayez Market quite a bit, and I entered and I was like super blown away by just like similar to the project, just like that coexisting of that Western Eastern place, but it felt so unique at the same time, like even though there were two distinct sides and certain sellers and stuff. And I think your work represents that kind of marriage between that duality of not just maybe that place, but a lot of places like Church Street that are around London. It was interesting to see that reflected in your work as well.
Yeah, Alfayez it's kind
It's
of an
special. If you're in London, you should check it out. Or I don't know if it's
yeah.
open still, but it's a great space. I think it's great. And then, like I said, as far as inspiration as well for the project, I think it was a perfect representation for visualizing that third space. So
Yeah, I mean it's crazy. Like when you go in there, there's also like an indoor pool and stuff. And for me,
yeah.
it was such a magical space, just because firstly you see like on the facade it has Nubian paintings on one side, and then
Mm-hmm.
and then European paintings on the other.
Yeah.
I think it was Gustav Klimt paintings. So, and then you see the Alfayez and then the Alfayez name, and it was a perfect place to start. I think. I think
Mm-hmm.
at first I hesitated because architecturally, I don't think many people find that interesting. But actually, when you go inside, it's like there's an indoor street, and then because you're liberated from the restrictions you may have on the actual street doors, you have traders that kind of decorate their stores with literally whatever they want. Paintings, china, frivolous kind of signage. There's so much freedom in there for them to kind of almost territorialize their units.
And so
Yeah.
when you were creating images of Arabia, was a lot of what you saw on Church Street and specifically in Alfayez, was that kind of used in the modeling and the representation and depiction of a lot of the images, or a lot of the, I mean, along with the novel, but how did you basically conceptualize a lot of what you saw on Church Street and a lot of what was represented there in your work? Like, how did you get basically from that inspiration to that visualization for it, and including like the process and modeling and all that stuff?
Well, actually, on top of all these ideas, it was very important for me to kind of to keep it authentic, to reimagine it in a contemporary format. And so actually for me it was all about not borrowing from just one idea or one novel or story. So for example, with Season of Migration to the North, later on you'll see there's an image that's based on the Den of Lethal Lies, which is a room from the novel. But I kind of merged that with the look of the units that you'll see in Alfayez Antique Store. And so I reimagined some of the spaces within this novel and pretended kind of, Mustafa, the character, is now much older and now works in Alfayez and sells his antiques. And his Den of Lethal Lies becomes that shop. That's kind of how, those were almost my tools or my starting point, because I found it very difficult. It was kind of easy to just render the spaces as described in the novel. But for me, I really wanted to explore the kind of slightly futuristic kind of idea. So pairing these two ideas worked for me personally.
Mm-hmm. And so as far as like the actual drawings and representation, like, can you talk a little bit about like what tools, maybe digital or non-digital tools and platforms you use to create the work? For example, like, I don't know, architectural like tools like Rhino and stuff, but like Sketchpad or Instagram, or anything that helped you develop the work a little bit more on your end?
So one of the first drawings I produced for the Afrabia project was this one here on the right, named Transient Nile. And I remember before jumping immediately into the 3D, I kind of set up moments within the story that I wanted to recreate. And this was the moment that Mustafa, the main character, was leaving Sudan. And he refers to the River Nile as a snake god that had taken him as a victim. Once I had the idea for a drawing, I would start, or even sometimes to compose the image, I would bring up all the different philosophies or ideas that were important for me to convey through the image. So, for example, the here and there, the Sudan, the London, these are the skylines of both Khartoum and London. In the book, Mustafa talks about using scent quite a lot. If you're Sudanese, you'll know like about burning bukhur and burning sandalwood and different types of scented wood. The Kandaka, which is the Nubian queen, referring to time. And so I would pick the textures and pick the things that I wanted to use within the composition of an image, but also make sure that I could explain it, because during kind of the process, this whole process, I still had to, present it to a board or a panel at university, people who may have never been to Sudan before. And so it was very important to still be able to kind of communicate those ideas. So this is actually predominantly 2D. And so I would almost set them up like scenes or perspectives. And I would, collage is a 2D collage done purely on Photoshop. So these were like the kind of first images. And then when I started to jump into the 3D, this is when I started to use 3ds Max, which is 3D software that allows you to model things, download models, and build scenes and then texture them. And so here you see on the left, this is kind of like the 3D model, untextured, and then the right is the finished product. So this here is rendered, but then also I would add things like the sky, people and animals and the clouds via Photoshop. Rendering, if you know, rendering takes quite a lot of time. So sometimes I would render, but then go in there and play with it more in Photoshop. And so manipulating the final image was still important. I think sometimes there's a lot you can do with a render that might not be perfect. I'll still kind of use it and abuse it in Photoshop. So this is the 3D, and you can see here the Nefertiti and the Medusa. And this was a monument, I think I call it the monument to lost history in Sudan. And this came out of like reading that the Nefertiti bust that we all know of is not maybe a European fake, or is about only 100 years old. And the real Nefertiti is actually in Cairo and looks very different and has features that look a lot more African. And so this was just playing with the idea of like two European myths with a mirror in between. But what I was going to say was these downloaded from the internet, I wouldn't model everything.
Yeah.
And sometimes I would also manipulate things. So like in the background here, we have like, that's actually a Moroccan lantern that I've manipulated in 3D. And so there's like a level of 3D manipulation, but also 2D manipulation. That's kind of how I go about creating these images. This is the Mustafa's Den of Lethal Lies. This is the image I was speaking about earlier. And this is kind of a reimagination of his store in Alfayez, if you will. And this is again done through 3D. I have like a crocodile and a snake here, palm tree. Again, some of these are downloaded and I would manipulate them. And then here, the more kind of abstract forms are things I would model from scratch. So it's a combination of things. But also when I was looking for characters to animate my drawings with, I found it very, very fitting to look at Orientalist paintings, which is paintings mostly of the Moors, so Afro-Arabs actually, by Western painters, Western artists. And so you can see here, actually, this figure here, I would cut out, populate my drawings with. So this is kind of reimagining Mustafa. It's a combination of the 2D and 3D, for sure. And then you can see here, to have him fit within the scene, sometimes I would manipulate the lighting and the color and the saturation in Photoshop. So yeah, so it's a combination of many different things. I was also wanting to say that when I was
No, I was just gonna ask in your drawings about the text, because I know a lot of the images that we had shown had a lot of like Arabic texts, and so were those obviously phrases or some kind of story that you pulled from the novel itself, or are they like represented in a different way, or just something that you wanted to place as well within the drawings to give it more context or to give it another layer? Can you explain a little bit maybe about just the wording or the phrase and what it means and if it's tied to the novel?
So this here actually reads Den al-Akadib al-Qatila, which means Den of lethal lies. And this again, kind of when I was, modeling this, I was thinking of the signage that I would see at the Alfayez units. So even though I was sure no one at uni wasn't going to read it, it was so important because I think when you go to Alfayez and you see the different languages, the different aesthetics, they still add the overall aesthetics or the nature of the space.
Yeah, because I found a lot of your images contained obviously the text, and even though probably a majority of your audience is the Arabic reading audience, a lot of them are not, but they still, I think, added an emotional and it did add a presence to them, which I found were really important, just having the text there, even if you don't know what it says. Obviously, a lot of people would tie it together, but even if you didn't read the novel, like just having the text there gives it a different feeling. So
yeah, I kind of thought of Chinatown again and
Edgware
Road.
Exactly. Yeah.
When you go in there, and it's like the banks have, translated names in these spaces that, you're in London, but it's not in English because they're ethnic enclaves and they're kind of built for a specific community. These were the images that I took when I went to Sudan. So initially, when I started the project, I really struggled because I thought, okay, well, I know Sudan really well. I know Khartoum really well. And if I pull from these different Sudanese aesthetics, I'm going to understand that. But is a Western audience going to? Because I sometimes put all these like subtle kind of symbols within the drawings. And one way I went about that was go Sudan. I needed to go for a wedding anyways. So I was like, yeah, I'm doing research. I took many, many images from around the city. So if you know Sudan, again, you know that these are like kind of, these cityscapes are like engraved in your mind and these are architectural icons. Again, I knew of them, but not everyone did, and that's fine. But I think I felt like I needed to just show that in a very simple way without writing 50,000 words about them. And so with my portfolio, I submitted like about 120 page photographic essay, if you will, of different photos that kind of gives you an insight to everyday life in Sudan, what Sudan looks like. And so you can see here, they were just very simple. Sometimes I wouldn't even add a title, but it was just these. You can see here now, this is what I was trying to achieve with some of the signages as well. Everything from interiors to whole buildings to street life and the markets, I tried to capture within this little book. And it was designed to be something you could just flick through very quickly and then move on to the drawings. But then hopefully it gave a quick insight into Sudanese aesthetics and Sudanese culture.
Yeah, I can see a lot of and remember a lot of these same images in the drawings as well, merged, with Church Street and stuff. And I remember like it was really difficult for you to take the photos, remember? Like you said, it was during a really difficult time in Sudan, in Khartoum actually, where you kind of had to take a lot of these photos like under the radar and so forth.
Yeah, it was taken at the very start of the Sudanese revolution. So it was quite dangerous to be walking around with a camera because I looked like I was reporting, and it was not safe to do. So a lot of the images, I took maybe 700 images and I had to visit it down to 120 or something because a lot of them were just blurry because I was in
You
a
were
car.
trying to do it really quick.
Trying to take them and run.
Yeah, no, I think they're great images, and I think during ours we didn't get to show quite a bit, but during Imagining Afrabia at Rich Mix, I saw quite a few, and they were just exactly a great representation of what that third space, merged with Church Street and everything came out in your work. I have a question about that. I know you described the third space as that is in your work represented quite a bit as that in between space between here and there. And you've mentioned it already a little bit that it makes you feel that you belong everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Has belonging in this space your whole life, like, has that helped you? Did it help you, or did it like present challenges, or both, like in being able to represent your work for a wider audience?
At first, I found it very, very difficult, and I even thought about not doing this project at all because I thought, well, there's so much communication that I will be doing that not everyone will be able to necessarily read. But I found actually from doing the exhibition and talking to different people and even my experience with you that a lot of people live in that third space. It's
Yeah.
not just Sudanese, British, it's anyone that might be Western, non-Western. Even, I remember thinking you could even feel like you're in the third space if you're stuck between two careers or something. The third
Yeah,
space isn't
there's
exclusive.
space. Yeah, it's not an exclusive. It's not exclusive to ethnicity. I feel like it could be a religious thing, a sexuality. It can come from expressing an ethnicity, or like you said, between two careers. So it's a really special place that I think a lot of us can relate to. Which is why, even though your work is mostly based around hybridism and ethnic hybridity, it talks to everyone in that way, and being able to belong in these spaces and in every part of your life. So I think that was also something that talked a lot to the audiences about the work. But yeah, but being able to
Yeah,
represent that to the wider audience, meaning like everyone can relate to it, or to some extent, not just by, like you said, ethnicity.
yeah, definitely not just ethnicity, but even within ethnicities, you don't have to be, I think, Sudanese or British to know what that third space is like.
Right.
Something I learned really from after doing, and maybe it was just an imposter syndrome. At first, I felt like my project was communicating nothing, and it was almost like something I was doing just for myself. But from meeting other people, it sounds like a lot of people can relate to it and read the drawings more than I thought they could.
Is that the feedback you got mostly from audiences that came to view your work,
Yeah,
was that they also felt represented in that third space by your work?
the exhibitions, because they were in London, I guess a diverse set of people came to see those drawings. But what was also interesting and rewarding to see was that the Sudanese audience maybe would have read a lot more into some of, like, they would have been able to read the signage, for example.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so different people read them differently as well, which I think is still valuable. It's I find it interesting to see what
Mm-hmm.
other people and what you create as well, things that I might not have seen myself.
And so do you feel effectively, how do you then express like effectively the concept or idea of that Afro era British place to a Western audience? I mean, like you said, we all kind of have some kind of idea from our own being in our own third spaces of what that would be, but physically and like just trying to imagine that as in a Western audience, was that difficult for you? Like, were you able to express and communicate that effectively, you think, that Afro era British?
A lot of it came from experimenting. Like it wasn't like I did the first drawing and it was like, oh, that's successful, and I did, the other 15 or the other 20. It was I had to do drawings that maybe failed, and thankfully I had like very supportive tutors at the time who supported the whole process but would give me good feedback. And so
Mm-hmm.
even people at uni, like friends that I had at uni, I was able to say, okay, well, does this work? Can you tell me what you think about this drawing? And so actually sometimes collaborative kind of work
Mm-hmm.
helps, or collaborative feedback, just asking people what they genuinely think about your drawings.
Especially if they're not that obviously Sudanese background, like you wanted to resonate, right, with them in some way.
Yes, yeah. Well, I know that the people who probably marked my portfolio were definitely not Sudanese,
Yeah.
British, Indian, Rahesh, but not architecture is very white. if I'm very honest, and that was something like I was really worried that it was just going to be seen as frivolous, but doing things like this, like backing up your kind of ideas, but also like before saying, sometimes I would diagram my ideas in position behind my drawings, and so you don't see it here, but there's like about 100-page portfolio, including the drawings, that diagram the novel, the different spaces within the novel, what Orientalism means. And I broke things up into just very simple diagrams. And so I tried to, like, whenever I was doing a drawing, try to think, well, what am I doing here? And just kind of name the different components and just put them on a page. And so there was almost a diagram like this, a page like this done for almost every drawing to explain it at the beginning.
Did you have any other like inspiration? I mean, I know the book obviously and Church Street and everything, but was there any other like novels or authors or poems or anything like that that helped the development or inspired your work in any way?
I think Seasonal Migration to North was definitely up there, and it was heavily inspired from that. But in all honesty, there's kind of little bits from different things. So like music, Sudanese music as well. I listen to a lot of what's called hakiba, which is like kind of classic traditional Sudanese music. And there's there's a lot of storytelling in Sudanese music. And so that kind of the power to communicate a story from different times or different spaces, I'd kind of tried to translate that in a visual format. So yeah, and my family's like kind of homes back in Sudan. I always thought their homes were really beautiful, even if they were like kind of, I felt like at a time, because they weren't, maybe they look like nothing that I saw here in London. They felt like they were a little bit unconventional, but that's where, like, with this project, I tried to push the idea that actually different ethnicities should have their own kind of definitions of modernism or what the contemporary is. It's not always the vernacular or the primitive if it's from elsewhere.
Right. And so you've shown a Magic Realist Afrabia a couple of times this year, and obviously since the lockdown, it's been difficult to kind of keep the momentum going. But so far, obviously, you've tried to keep the project visible and as much as you can. And can you tell us a little bit about kind of what's next for this project, and if you're exploring another chapter, or if is there another layer? Do you kind of see in the future that there's something else that's going to follow up this project, and anything in the next year or so?
So Afrabia initially kind of started as the idea of a Afrabian ethnic enclave in London. And so now I'd love to kind of experiment a little bit more with futurisms in Sudan. I'd like to develop my skills further. I'd love to learn how to animate these drawings as well, because the software that I use to produce these drawings is software that can also animate the 3D. And so I'd love to animate some of them and just kind of go back to the images I took in Sudan. I just started, this is very work in progress, but to start sketching over them and see what I could build in 3D. So I think the next chapter is like maybe possibly sited within Sudan.
Yeah.
Instead of within London. So kind of almost like do the reverse.
Right. And then create, I don't know if you're working with 3D, or I know you mentioned you were working with new also digital tools, because a lot of the tools that you used to create this were you had access to them in uni, right? And now you don't. So they're just trying to experiment with different type of platforms and digital tools to kind of help you create another chapter, another version of Arabia.
At uni, I used, for images like this, I used software 3ds Max. But really, it's software I had access to at uni, and it's quite expensive, honest, and it's quite difficult to maintain. So I'm looking at, there's definitely free alternatives. I'm looking at using Blender and 3D modeling there. But I've had access since uni to 3ds Max, so I've still been building in 3D, but just not as much. I mean, at university, this was 7 days a week, or maybe 14 hours a day or something. This is all I had to do. So it was easy to kind of like churn out the drawings then. But now I think I want to experiment more with the idea of like ethnic futurisms, especially in the MENA region.
Cool. Do we have any questions from the audience or anyone have any comments? I know Rim had a comment earlier, beautiful images. And they are. But if anyone has any questions for Rayan or
I think in one of my, if you're Sudanese, you'll know that Nile Street, which we call Rayan Nile, is like a huge part of Sudanese culture. It's a long street, and it's where it feels like it's where almost everyone goes in the evening for tea and coffee. And so when I would refer to those places through symbols, or I'd put signage and actually write Rayan Nile in Arabic, Sudanese people obviously completely recognize that. And the burning sandalwood, again, I mean, this is something I think we burn every single day at home. So again, they recognize those textures, the pattern. So Sudanese people definitely recognize those kind of things. My parents as well. It was almost like funny to them. I was like, oh, you put, something we just use every single day, and they would see it in the drawings.
Yeah, and where did a lot of people recognize, have they read the novel? Because I know that novel's not, I mean, I read it when we started working together, but were they familiar with it as well, Sudanese? Is that like a standard text?
Yeah, I mean, everyone Sudanese who came to the galleries had read it.
Okay.
So yeah, so it was kind of, it was strange, like even like, Yahya at P21.
Yeah.
I found it so nice. I remember when presenting it to people like Yahya, that all I had to say, was season of migration to North, and that was, oh, okay, yeah, I get it. At uni, I had to diagram it and really work hard. And okay, let me step back and try and communicate this idea a little bit better.
Yeah, definitely. Is there any other questions? Does anyone?
Yes. Nice to meet you. First of all, I think your drawings are amazing. They're incredible. I haven't seen anything with such a tonal palette and tonal range assembled in the same way before. I just think they're amazing. I'm just wondering, do you have any resources you could recommend to someone who wants to learn more about the art of visualization? Whether it's a repository for certain models, or tutorials online, or precedents for similar visualizations, or even workflows, like for certain moments that you tweak up or down within, in your case, 3ds Max or Photoshop for deepening shadows or increasing clarity. Because my background, I mean, I'm university in architecture in Ireland, but it's very text heavy by its nature, and it's a social study. And I want to learn more about how I could best represent these ideas, because my research context is it's not mainstream. So for me, visualizing is also a way, or a very good device at communicating this space. So anything that you could recommend, I'd be very interested.
Well, I don't know if you've started with 3D modeling and you picked a software, but I almost regretted going to 3ds Max, if I'm honest. I mean, it's an amazing software. It's amazing, but it's so expensive. There's no way I can maintain it. It's something that professional visualizers use. But there are resources like Blender out there, which are completely free, and they're even better because there's actually countless tutorials. I mean, you really just have to kind of YouTube, how do I texture, or how do I create a sphere, or whatever. And you can animate on that as well. So I would recommend Blender, but even if it's not Blender, I just used to watch tons of YouTube tutorials, and I actually learned along the way so that I could churn out the drawings maybe a little bit quicker. For me, it was like a 5-year process, just because I would try and learn what I needed to for that drawing, and then the next and the next, without you even noticing. By the time you've done the 6th or 7th drawing, you're able to do them a lot faster, just because you're learning with intent, if that makes sense. I think sometimes it's kind of a bit counterproductive when you learn with nothing to model or nothing designed. But if you have an idea, let it be you could start with modeling just your bedroom, for example, but with all its details. And that's just a fantastic way to learn, I think. How to visualize. I hope that helps.
Yeah, it does. I have one follow-up question if nobody's jumping in.
Sure.
If you were to do this project again, would you do anything differently, looking back?
Yeah, Yeah, I would do a lot differently. I think.
Besides Bender.
Yeah. Besides, yes, Max regret. I think I did maybe more drawings than I needed to. And I think I remember in one crit, I was told that I should have animated, and it made sense because it's all about storytelling, and the ideas were a lot more kind of dynamic. So I wish I'd maybe created less drawings, but maybe made, even if it was just a tiny little film, to represent more from that idea. Because the thing is, behind these 3D drawings is everything's modeled. You just need to move the camera after that. And so there's not much to do between rendering and animating a still image from animation. You just need to move the camera. So I wish I'd done maybe 1 or 2 animations, but that's what I'm trying to do now.
Yeah, I just want to say to Rayan, thank you so much for joining us and talking with us about your work. And I'm really excited to see you evolve as an artist and all the exciting things in your future post-COVID. And hopefully we'll have a chance to work together again soon.
Yes, definitely.
And thank you, Marie. Thank you, Agora. And thank you, everyone.